So, welcome to China Calling all. To old friends and new friends who are joining us today here at Dutch Design Week. We are delighted to be here. I am Marie, and together with Lidi, Izzy, and Elaine, we will be guiding you through this afternoon, traveling to China and back. We would like to give a short welcome words to our partners, and we will start with Jorn Konijn, the Program Director of Dutch Design Week.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marianne. Welcome, everybody. This, I think, is the 5th day now at Dutch Design Week. Already kind of lost track, I must say. But thank you so much for being here. I think we started discussing this event some couple of months ago, and I was particularly thrilled to have this here and to start this dialogue that has actually been going on for a long time already, but have it really physical, because of course last year it was just only digital. At least a week, and I think you guys were one of the few who did something physical, if I remember. But I think this collaboration and this dialogue between China and the Netherlands is very valid and very necessary. I had the privilege myself to work for some time in China, and I share many good memories about that. So very happy to see this, and I hope this really will build up in the next couple of years to something bigger, to something even more fruitful. So thank you so much. Maybe very quickly about the theme of Design Week this year. We're talking about the greater number, which started in the process of Corona last year. We were really thinking about what should be the theme that we're addressing in October 2021 right now. What is really a valid theme? And we thought we'd be out of Corona by now, but kind of thinking about what type of society we really want. Do we want more production, more consuming, or should we try to find a better balance, a better number? So it's really searching for this greater number, so to speak. And I think the greater number is also something very relevant to China, which is of course very much about greater, bigger. But I think there's a lot of nuance there as well, and a lot of great thinkers who are challenging this, who are questioning this. So I'm very curious to hear these thoughts and these ideas here as well. Thank you so much again for being here. Wishing you a very good session today. I unfortunately have to run to the next meeting, but thanks again, and I hope you have a great time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jorn. I think it's very important that the Dutch Design Week, although they are always focusing, of course, on Dutch design, is also international. And I know with Jorn, China is also covered. I mean, I know there is a lot of attention for international developments in the Dutch Design Week and also for China. So I'm really grateful.
I'm gonna run.
Yes, you're allowed. Like I said, the Dutch Design Week is a very it's an icon in the Netherlands, but it's also an icon in China. I'm very happy that we're on the 3rd year in row. Entry is making a program about China during the Dutch Design Week. Last year it was online. This year we are here present in this beautiful converted chapel. And I'm very happy that together with Peter Kirsten and Tommy Hendricks, Entry is formed together with also this year the China-Europe Design. My name is Monique Knapen, and I am representing the Creative Holland China department, and we try to help smaller and middle-sized companies to make the way to China. Later on, we will do a little more explanation about that. And although China is far away and it's difficult to travel now, it's not easy to visit. In the past, I think there were many delegations from China visiting the Dutch Design Week. This year, we have people online, like we did last year. But this year, I want to especially welcome also the Alibaba Design Group, who will be in the program later on, and also Cora Feng from Object Asia and ADCC of China Interior Design Association. Like anywhere else, you need to have partners to make a project work. For the edition of this year, I'm very proud that we team up with the China Cultural Center in The Hague. This center strives really to introduce Chinese culture and to connect to Dutch audiences. Mr. Huang of the China Cultural Center is here. I think he followed the Dutch Design Week for many years, and I'm really happy that he's partnering up this year with the entry program. Mr. Huang, can I ask you to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Monique, for your kind introduction. I'm Huang Hongchang. On behalf of the China Cultural Center Den Haag, I would like to say thanks to DDW and Creative Holland and Entry and also China Europe Design for making this opportunity for sharing us this great platform so that we can work with them to make it happen, the China Calling. China Cultural Center Den Haag is a non-profit cultural institution dedicated to fostering the cultural and exchanges between the two countries. It's a window and a link of both countries. And as we are going to explain what the China culture is going to do, actually you can get on our website to see what we have been doing for the next 5 years. And this time, I think it's good for us to tell that we have just finished a successful exhibition in China Cultural Center 2 weeks ago, named a Healing Journey Through Mountains and Waters. And this will go also coming to a show in Eindhoven in 2 weeks. So this is also a practice of the cultural aspects and also practice. So I hope they will take this chance to share with you, and let's expect some of the designers of China and the Netherlands to share their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. You can stay too. Thank you, Mr. Huang, and thank you, Monique. So we are in the third year here at Dutch Design Week for China Calling, and our mission is to gain a deeper understanding, foster curiosity, and develop cooperation in the design sector in the Netherlands and China for mutual interest. Our activities aim to accelerate exchange of knowledge and best practices to tackle challenges which affect both countries, but also humanity on a global scale. Thanks to our partners today, Creative Holland, China Cultural Center, the Netherlands, the City of Amsterdam, Entry, and the newly created platform China Europe Design. Not a day goes by without reading headlines about China in the news. With more than 1.5 billion inhabitants, it represents 1/5 of humanity. When discussing global challenges, China has and will remain essential. With its technological sector, which is growing at an unparalleled rate, its recent developments towards an eco-civilization, it's clear that China's green industry lies ahead of us. The importance of knowledge transfer and the need for cooperation has become more pertinent than ever, with the design sector as a key player to connect and build a common design projects towards a regenerative future. We are delighted to present to you today our program and our theme, Heal. Heal is a direct response to the pandemic and the current climate crisis. We could not be in a better location than this chapel to reflect and ask questions on a shared design project for the future. By healing, we mean restoring balance and well-being. And we adhere to also the principles of classical Chinese medicine, which brings the naturalistic Taoist philosophy to the fore, a philosophy which interconnects both life, health, nature, and the universe as interconnected. In fact, when we look at the definition of healing in English, healing also means to make whole. Whole and heal share the same etymology. Today we will look at healing in a broader sense, between design practices. And we will start with the first presentation on context, and we will move towards practice in the second half. And we will end with a session with Alibaba Design, which Monique will be hosting. So we are looking forward to a very exciting and comprehensive journey between cultures to lead to a new path towards a regenerative future. So we are proud today to have with us some key actors, old and new China's hands, which are coming from a multiplicity of disciplines. We have 3 parts, and we are really happy today to have you, the public, not only online, but for the first year again, to have you in the audience. So please join us in these discussions and in this journey. We will start by looking at context with 4 leading design thinkers, curators, and discuss framework of the current China context. So we will invite our speakers now to the fore, Ole Bouman, Martijn de Geus, Aric, Chen, and Ying. So please, if you could go through this. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we will start today with Ole Bouman, who we have the pleasure to welcome in person whilst he is back from China for a short while. Ole is the founding director of Design Society, the new design museum and platform in Shenzhen, listed by Time magazine amongst the world top 100 greatest places. You might also know him as the former editor-in-chief of Volume and the director of the NIE, as well as the curator of many groundbreaking exhibitions in China, the Netherlands, and far beyond. We are honored he is here with us today to share his experience. He has been in China for over 8 years. I believe he even speaks Chinese now and starting to look a bit Chinese as well. So we'll give the floor to you, Ole.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Yes, I think living in China for such a long time actually helps you not only to understand China better, but also to start looking at the West and at your own country in a different way. And hopefully this resonates to some extent in the small 5-minute lecture that I have prepared. So let's start with the title, which is in itself already referring to the topic of heal. Although I do think, and that's one of the lessons that I learned living in China, that healing is actually already too late. It's better to prevent. The moment you have to heal something, there is already a problem. But deep down in Chinese culture, as I came to understand, is something that tries people to prevent a situation where you have to heal. So it's like almost like intrinsic healing, something that you learn from a very early age to engage with the other, to be with the other, to understand the other. And this feeling, this cultural notion, this trope, so to speak, in Chinese culture is very well represented in the character of, not the character of heal, yu, but the character of he, and that's a part of the title today. So rather than heal, I propose he all, trying to open your mind and to think about a way to synthesize all your contrasting values, all your opposite meanings, all your ideas about either or, all your zero-sum games. It's an effort to think about synthesis right away. So he all, and my name partly, of course, because we're talking about the synthesis in Chinese. Yeah. So obviously, at an event like this, people start talking about mutual understanding, mutual inspiration, the wonderful dialogue between cultures and the strong interest, as you represent today as audience, into engagement with China. But apparently you must be the exception to the rule, because if you look around in the global arena, if you think about the global discourse on China today, you see an incredible level of animosity and even antagonism, and sometimes even worse than that. And you only have to look at the mainstream media wordings, the rhetorics, their graphics, and the iconography of antagonism, and you will find the examples abundantly. And here is, for instance, one of these titles that is an expert in representing this antagonism, The Economist, explaining how the West got China wrong. But maybe not in the way as is explained and investigated in The Economist. We can try to do the same and try to understand China in an alternative way. So, to focus on this discourse of antagonism, there is, of course, the endless reproduction of the word decoupling. Maybe it's a little bit less than 2 years ago when there was this strong trade war raging on, but it's still a very obvious part of the so-called mutual engagement, actually to end mutual engagement in the form of decoupling. But it's not only towards the country, China, that there is this sense of decoupling. Actually, there are many other forms of decoupling that we can think about. One, for instance, is the decoupling of the analog or the physical world, an emerging world where we are dealing more and more in terms of digital and even virtual exchanges. So in a way, there is the decoupling of the physical. And some people would also say we are about, and very deliberately as humanity, to decouple of ourselves from the planet Earth by abusing the natural resources to such an extent that we may make our own environment extremely hostile. So there are many ways to consider decoupling. I have the feeling that this battery is almost at its end. But there are also more inside the world of aesthetics or the world of design, let's say phenomena, features that let people think about, are we actually close to what we really need to do? Are we really engaging with the right questions? Or are we positioning our beautiful, beloved discipline of design, art, architecture, to worlds that are only relevant for maybe a 0.1% of humanity, and even less? So this can also be called a kind of decoupling. Decoupling from the real question, the real world, as Victor Papanek, for instance, once said. And this is also a challenge for design. Are we decoupling ourselves through all the anti-COVID measures? Are we decoupling ourselves from our social life? There is another sense of decoupling that you can think about. So, coming to the issue of today, the issue of Chinese culture and what it can tell us in terms of recoupling or actually engaging with the forces around us and with the interests that we have to deal with throughout our lives. There is, of course, a 1,000-year-old tradition and cultural language that is exactly about that, about engagement, mutual understanding, finding balance, complementarity, and maybe the most obvious and probably the most well-known graphic image to represent that kind of thinking is the yin-yang sign. And although it's not complete here on the left side of the sign, there is this famous Chinese saying, 天人合一. And this means is actually the core meaning of a worldview that is very much about understanding the other as a given, trying to encompass opposing forces in a balanced worldview right from the beginning, rather than as a compensation or as a effort afterwards. And this element, this value, so intrinsic in Chinese culture as I came to learn it, which I encountered almost every day or every hour in dealing with Chinese colleagues, in dealing with questions from audiences, in dealing with expectations from clients, and so many more situations. I think this is an experience that makes you understand that what we can learn from China is much more than its productivity or its ideological hang-ups. It is something that stems back from thousands of years of cultural development. So I will run through the remaining slides just to represent this deep learning of a culture that only seems to happen when you are really embedded. It comes back in architecture. It comes back in very traditional architecture, such as a temple or in the Tulo, where this notion of he, this notion of togetherness, this notion of mutual understanding as a given, is almost intrinsically spatialized in the form of architecture itself. And also in more recent examples of, for instance, urban villages, you see this self-evident inclination to reach out to the other, almost literally in handshake buildings. It's normal to shake hands with your neighbor, even if that sometimes comes with the cost of a certain lack of living standards or living quality. And you see it also on a macro level in the way the Chinese organize their travels during the Chinese New Year exodus, giving the image of a country that is, let's say, revolving around a certain nucleus that comes from a value to share such an important moment of the year with your family. And if you go to other more contemporary examples of the Chinese trying to bring back this element of he to the many fields of modernization and urban development, you see it in the way they develop a new battery culture that allow people to reach a higher level of quality of life by the ideas of the ecological civilization, which was already mentioned. It comes back in the way people deal with their trash. They deal with their entrance mechanisms of their houses. It comes back in the way they deal with nature parks, the way they access public transport. Just a variety of very different moments in daily lives where you can read into the very way the Chinese organize their modern lives as the reproduction of he in a contemporary fashion. This is, by the way, an Alibaba project that is about appealing, inviting digerati, people who are spending most of their time on the internet, to calculate how much of value they want to invest in the planting of real trees throughout China. So as a kind of game, give people the floor to not just let them consume their digital minutes, but also by doing so, producing a positive act of renaturing, so to speak. And finally, coming back to my own experiences, this culture of combination, this culture of engagement with the past, engagement with industry, engagement with landscape, is represented in this project I had the privilege to do in Shenzhen called Value Factory, where we had the opportunity to transform an old glass factory. Okay. with an imagery that tries to capture this sense of dialogue between old and new, industry and culture, and a program that clearly represents this attitude. And then finally, Design Society, a new design museum, design platform, Shiji Hulian in Chinese, in Shenzhen as well, where the very act of designing is immediately related to building society, and where, as you, as citizens, are building society, can see yourself as designers in return. And I, for the sake of time, I just will finish with some impressions of this project, Design Society. The initial rendering showing the situation at the waterfront of Shekou, Shenzhen, with in the background Hong Kong. And the real actual realization of the building at that same spot. Trying to integrate nature into the building, citizenship into the building, into the institution, and mixing a whole range of functions in the same spirit of combining the best of different domains. So I will not go into detail that much, but give you the very idea of providing a platform, not just as a statement, to impose a statement, a worldview, an institutional standard onto the world, but actually present the whole institution as an open invitation for people to join and to use that space almost like a Hansa grid and to write their own creative text with us. Here, the first reflections on how this would work institutionally, and here the physical and spatial translation of such an attitude, providing an ecology of different domains, commercial, public, cultural, in a synthesis represented by the architecture itself. Inviting partners like the Maker Faire, but not just invite them, but actually capturing their best ideas to support our own programs, working with the younger generations and get them involved in the creative act. So final picture showing this whole message that I try to convey, collaboration as the quintessence of a project like this, resonating a 1,000-year-old value of ge, but actually completely contemporary, and actually also in a little bit with a little bit touch of the Dutch. No longer the Hongbao idea of the red envelope, but this time at the occasion of Chinese New Year, an orange envelope. So with these words, at the occasion of this intercultural dialogue, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Ole. So we're going to travel now to Beijing to meet Martijn de Geus, who is an award-winning architect and deputy director at Tsinghua University School of Director. He has a very special relationship with nature, and he'll tell us a little bit more about this, as well as with his research on holistic design. So Martijn, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Okay, welcome, thank you. Today my talk is called One World, Two Futures. And because of the time constraints, I've tried to divide it into three very clear sections. So first I'm going to talk about what this means, why is this relevant, how we can deal with it, and hopefully after that you'll think, wow, that's amazing. Okay, so first of all, what are we discussing today? Healing. So it's about possibilities for healing and how can design shape the healing process to do good and not less bad to our world. What can we learn from the Chinese and Western approach to healing. Okay, then why do we need this? What is there that needs to be healed? I think it's important to know. Well, first of all, let's start with some gorillas. I used to work as a zookeeper in a zoo in the Netherlands. These are the gorillas I work with, and it was a beautiful representation of their natural environment. However, I found after working there that there's many places in the world that humans are not recreating natural environments, but rather destroying them. And animals are left fighting against human machines in order to try and protect their environment. And of course, they're failing at that. I found in addition that the modern mass production of our cities has a direct effect on our natural habitat. We are replacing this natural world with man-made cities and urbanized environments. In addition, buildings and building operations in particular are responsible for almost 50% of the energy consumption. That's partially responsible as well for the destruction of these natural environments. And I found that this could largely be traced back to one particular book. This book by Le Corbusier, for you that are no architects today, he described the process in which buildings are becoming machines for living. And I was wondering, if this is the case, do we really need more of that? Do we need more destruction, sameness, Western-centric, egocentric, male-dominated, consumption-driven society? Or could we go towards an alternative future? A future that's more diverse, it's more ecological-driven, it's evolving, and it's a path to a more sustainable future. Okay, then we understand what we're healing. Then how are we going to get about this? How are we going to do this? Well, what if we consider this architecture that I was mentioning before was responsible for almost 50% of the energy use and the destruction of this environment? Let's consider architecture as a means, not as a goal, but architecture as a means to go from an age of the machine towards the age of life, like Kyushu Kurokawa here wrote in his book, The Philosophy of Symbiosis, which happened to be the first book I read on architecture. It made me have hope for our discipline. And as such, I actually created a small building 15 years ago as a statement against these concrete, inhumane environments I saw around me that were replacing the natural environment. And this little building is actually a building that's fully built in wood, with an outer skin of recycled clothes, and that creates a symbiotic relationship between man and nature. Unfortunately, after I was studying architecture following this creation, I was subsequently taught that architecture was about tall buildings, about old Western history, about conquering rather than symbiosis. Alternatively, later on in life, I found that for me, architecture is broader than that. It incorporates books that come from a post-Western or a non-Western base. And this has led me to create this narrative that is based, I would call it as a post-Western theory. It includes a theory that's based upon the understanding that our actions have an effect onto our future, and we have the ability to intervene, like the Book of Changes holds, which is the oldest book in China. It's also based on an understanding of our environment as a balanced system, and people as human beings with their own natural specificities. This, for instance, can be traced back to the book Huangdi Neijing, which is the origin of Chinese medicine. It's the origin of an understanding of balance, rather than, let's say, a system of unification and control. It's also realizing that cultures around the world deal and have dealt with the same questions of how to place people in their environment. And we can probably learn from that. For instance, in this book, which I find very inspirational, which is about the Chinese conception of space, by Li Xiaodong. In addition, we should consider a holistic conception, for instance, rooted in feng shui, which is not just an understanding through dissection or separation and trying to solve things within narrow self-enclosed systems. It's about finding the right place to intervene with the right intensity and the right depth, an acupunctural approach. Likewise, we can talk about integration instead of conquering, and understand that there are several similar strategies of finding systems for replicable strategies of appropriately placing people within their surroundings, such as here in the feng shui maps. Altogether, I hope that we can go towards a comprehensive, inclusive, universal understanding, not based on cultural bias, exclusion, or destruction. And we should turn this theory into practice. So how can we go away from this notion of making architecture as machines that are there to conquer and replace nature? I think it's simple. We should go towards a habitat, not towards an architecture. And in my own work, I try to combine this theoretical idea through a practice that I have with my partner and wife, Han Zhang. And we have an office that combines the Western mentality with the Eastern approach altogether. And hopefully like this, we can go towards a future that's different from this path of destruction we're currently on. We can go towards a future that's more empathetic, more ecological, and I would suggest post-Western. Post-Western in the sense that it's not about what we already know. It's about looking towards a future that can be more than that. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go next. So we're going to go to Aric. So Aric, we're delighted that you're here. You're the director of the Nieuwe Instituut. You just got to the Netherlands a couple of months ago.
Yes.
You've been in China for the last decade, and you've been really one of the most influential figures in Chinese and in design today. You were born and raised in the United States. You were a curator, a professor, writer, and creative director. And you've served in many roles, leadership roles as M+, Beijing Design Week, the Design Miami, and fairs in Basel and Miami Beach. We're honored to have you here, and actually you have a very long relationship with the Netherlands. And you've been active also promoting Dutch design in China for a very long time. With Richard, who is here, who you brought to Design Shanghai, I believe, 8 years ago.
Oh, yes. Hey, Richard.
You've worked with Christina de Baal and Dutch DFA, brought Dutch design to Beijing Design Week, ended up also with a partnership with Amsterdam Cities. And so we're really delighted that you're here. And you're going to share a little bit about your experience working in design in China. So the floor is yours.
Sure, great, thank you. Could I get the little...
Yeah, sorry.
So, you know, I'm American, as you said, but of course my family is Chinese, and, you know, when I first moved to China, one of the things you hear is, from a lot of people who've been there for a long time, is that the longer you're in China, the less you know, or the more you realize, the less you know. So I don't have any sort of thesis or anything, but instead, Marianne just said, just tell us what you've done, and hopefully that'll be a starting point for a discussion later. So I'm calling it My Adventures in China, and you'll see the 2008 Bird's Nest Olympic opening ceremony. That's when I moved to China. I was in New York at the time, writing for various newspapers and magazines, when newspapers and magazines were still things to write for. And I basically had an early midlife crisis, went to Beijing for initially 6 weeks, and it wound up being actually 13 years in China. I mean, I was already starting to do a little bit of curating in New York at that time, but my first project in China was in Shanghai. Actually, it began when I was still living in New York, and that was I was co-creative director of the 100% Design Shanghai fair, a trade fair, affiliated with what was then the 100% Design Fair in London. It was being billed as, you know, this is that kind of period when everyone was billing themselves as the first whatever in China. This was billed as the first international design fair in China. Who knows if that's true? Doesn't really matter. And then I started doing more kind of projects like the Get It Louder biennial in Beijing and Shanghai. Soon, as you mentioned, I was invited to be the creative director for a newly relaunched Beijing Design Week, which was a pretty big government initiative in China. Everything, as many of you probably know, has to be big, and this was big as well. It was throughout the city with massive opening ceremony, of course, and theme exhibitions and forums and so on. But then the part we really tried to focus on was to kind of use this top-down structure to kind of nurture a more bottom-up sort of development of a design infrastructure in China. So it was really about opening up a platform and as many spaces as we could find to the actual designers, the media, the businesses and brands, of course, but also the museums and curators and so on and so forth. There were a number of core areas. One was 751, a former industrial area, where in 2012, this is where we met, Marianne and of course Christine, where the Dutch DFA initiative at that time did an incredible presentation, massive, really wonderful as well. But maybe in the context of healing, I will just briefly talk about Dashilar, which is one of the kind of most fascinating and important historic districts in Beijing. As you can see, it's really right in the heart of the city. Its history goes back to the very founding of Beijing. Its alleyway pattern actually it emerged from the link between the previous capital and where Beijing is now, as Beijing now was being built. So it goes back way back, and through the years, through the centuries, it became the site of China's first. Here we are back to firsts again, but first stock exchange building, first cinema, a lot of the sort of old classic silk brands and so on and so forth are there, as known for Chinese opera as well as all sorts of other things. At this period, during the Olympics, during the Olympic period, a lot of it was being quote unquote redeveloped, which meant in most cases back then being totally demolished. So you can see the central axis, Chen being was already demolished and kind of built in a sort of faux historic style, and then Dashilar was still largely intact but had begun being demolished in large swaths. So we were actually approached by Liang Jingyu of Approach Architecture, who was working then with the state-owned enterprise overseeing the redevelopment of that area, to help them implement a sort of more, let's say, sensitive mode of revitalization that not only was more sensitive to the urban fabric, but also to the existing social fabric in the neighborhood. I heard the word acupuncture with Martijn. Maybe he'll talk about that as well. But essentially, it was this acupuncture strategy that we were experimenting with. That was a way of providing an alternative, again, to this sort of tabula rasa, slash and burn mode of development that at that moment was still largely dominant. So through these events, through different programs, working with local businesses, with the local community, and then external parties, both from China and beyond. We developed a number of initiatives, workshops, events, research projects, et cetera, that as a way of beginning to kind of giving this acupuncture idea a little bit of a boost, because this was still kind of new as an idea at that time, and it's sort of untested. So. Oh gosh! Oh wow! Okay, so that was that, and then really quickly, and plus I then moved to Hong Kong, where I was a lead curator for design and architecture for this new museum that's opening in just a few weeks. big building by Herzog and Demiron, and again, finally about to open. It's a museum of visual culture, art, design, architecture, and moving image. I was over global from the vantage point of Hong Kong. And in terms of healing and this idea of balance, it was really about kind of, let's say, rebalancing the narratives of visual culture globally. So in other words, while you have like MoMA, let's say, and we were being positioned among that constellation of MoMA, Tate Modern, Pompidou, et cetera, while you have MoMA, Pompidou, Tate Modern telling global stories from the vantage point of New York, Paris, and London, the stated intention of M+ was to kind of play that role in starting in Hong Kong, of course, China, East Asia, Asia, and so on and so forth. We were building a collection, but more importantly, we were building narratives and a program. This is just one sort of chart that I always show. It's really very random about how you essentially recenter the narrative of mid-20th century plywood furniture, right? You still have the Eameses and Perrions and Le Corbusiers as important figures, but they then become sort of context for what in this case was the central story of how design and the story of plywood emerged in Japan in the mid-century. And we were doing this in all sorts of areas, all sorts of disciplines, all sorts of geographies, but just to give you a quick idea. Also looking at local vernaculars, like neon signs. This is an online exhibition we did that's still up if you want to have a look, where we were looking at neon signs as an integral part of Hong Kong's visual culture through the lens of cinema, art, craft, and industry, and so on and so forth, while also creating an archive, an open source, or crowdsourced archive of the neon signs that were still in existence at that time because they were rapidly disappearing. So we would ask the public to take photographs of their favorite signs, and we'd post them on this map. And again, this became, I think, the only archive, so to speak, of Hong Kong's neon landscape that, as far as I know, exists. Now, to 2018, I moved to Shanghai. Among other things, I took on a post as professor at the College of Design and Innovation at Tongji University. There, I started a curatorial lab, which was, kind of open platform again. So I'm almost done. We taught a design history and criticism course, which was a continuation in some ways of what we were doing at M+, recentering design narratives, this case firmly recentered in mainland China. But then we did a research studio, almost done, looking at curation in a contemporary Chinese context. Now, I think many of us may be familiar that we can't, that the infrastructure and contemporary condition of China is very different than what we might be used to here or in the US. You can't just sort of impose Western models onto China, and we see how museums are, at least in the contemporary field, are struggling there. So as part of this lab, what we try to do is we try to look at what was happening and how could we sort of work with that to create something perhaps more appropriate to the context. One of the areas we looked at was the convergence of art, shopping, and entertainment, in many ways building on Rem Koolhaas's Harvard Guide to Shopping 20 years ago, and some of the work he was doing with the Prada epicenters and Guggenheim, Las Vegas, etc. But in the context of China now in the digital age, when you have the influence of social media, e-commerce, etc. In China, in particular, you see the emergence of the art mall. Basically, shopping malls, brands, real estate. These are actually becoming, you could argue, the most dominant players in cultural production in China right now because they have the money, and so they are. The vast majority of people are probably experiencing contemporary culture as we think of it through brands, real estate, and shopping malls. So we looked at this art mall phenomenon to think about how, in what ways could we use what was happening to create sort of more meaningful and socially relevant content, so that these malls could also serve a social, cultural purpose as well as a commercial one. And then we wound up doing a workshop with emerging curators with K11, so we're actually trying to implement some of these things as well, so it's not just talking, but we try to do. And then finally, our more recent studio was what we called reverse curating space content and the museum as pre-existing condition. You may have all heard that there's been a massive museum building boom in China in the past 10 years. Thousands of museums are being built all over the place. These are a product of course, government policy, but also local tax structures and also bureaucratic promotion systems. Long story short, these museums are not being driven by curatorial agendas, but they're being driven by bureaucratic, political, economic, and even architectural agendas. So you have, in many cases, these spectacular buildings, but no one knows what to do with them. And oftentimes they don't have a function and they don't work for any function that then comes up. So the studio was about accepting this fact and saying, look, we have this great physical infrastructure that's not going to go away. What can we do with it? So we looked at existing buildings, museums that were not fulfilling their potential, and did a studio to kind of reverse curate, to find a use for them, to find a curatorial and cultural use for them. One case study was this, which is being built now in Yantai in Shandong province by Open Architecture. It's going to be a big data and phenomenological museum. It's kind of an amazing building. Its form is derived from the movement of the sun and the celestial calendar and so on and so forth. And with that, we were able to actually work with them, with the Yantai government, to actually make adjustments to the building and develop a curatorial program. This is Li Hu, the architect on site, and thank you very much.
Super. Thank you, Aric. So we're going to start with Lu Ying, because we have the privilege of having Lu Ying here, and she's a Chinese and Finnish thinker, doer, entrepreneur who has her own company and who's working on circular design and system design thinking. She's also part of the Global Shaper Network, and a big influence is also on how we can have practical use of also this knowledge. So we're going to switch over to Lu Ying. Welcome.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you so much, and it is an honor for me to be here as well. So today I will be speaking about systems thinking and circular design. But first, an introduction to my two worlds, as Marie introduced already. So East meets West. I was born in Shanghai, raised in Finland, and have lived across 3 different continents, 9 different cities, including Netherlands and Amsterdam, actually, as well. So culturally, I'm quite homeless. And my entire life, I've been navigating through different cultures, values, systems, what we consider as norms or facts as well. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because me balancing between these different realities has led me very much into what I'm doing today. So, as introduced before, I am the co-founder and CEO of Future Urban Living, and I operate at the intersection of circular economy, design, business strategy, and emerging tech such as blockchain. And I get asked why this combination of industries quite a bit. And because we operate in the space of climate change and resources use, we need multidisciplinary approaches to address what we're doing. Interesting number to keep in mind and to give you context in what we're doing is that only 8 supply chains today account for more than half of our global emissions. Only 8, huh? So, specifically, these are food, construction, fashion, automotive, fast-moving consumer goods, freight, electronics, and professional services. And any organization within any of these industries can easily be dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of different stakeholders across global value chains. And when they're spread so far, decarbonizing these chains and just transparency can be genuinely quite daunting. So as the nature of resource is changing and it's becoming more pass-through value, what we're seeing in here is industries are blending and also new industries are emerging. And this is where systems thinking comes in. Yeah. Okay.
Next slide.
Thank you. So it is all about understanding how different parts of a system interact and are interlinked with one another in a whole. Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm doing this or someone in the back is doing this, but this is perfect. So in terms of business, that focuses on next. traditional user-centric design where the receiver is the end user. Next. Our work in circular economy, we focus more on the input and the output of it. So the resources that go in terms of energy, raw materials, and also externalities that come out in the form of pollution and waste. Next. But since this is not enough, we've added a third actor into this called the local context. So this could be the city, infrastructure, geopolitics, and so forward. So we start evaluating and understanding their role in all of this as well. Next. And then even more, we zoom out to the fourth actor, which we call the natural ecosystem. So this could be the land, usage, or virgin material extraction. And our aim always is to redesigning these systems, loops within an ecosystem in a way that we maximize resource use and minimize waste. Next. So what we have at hand, instead of focusing on the end user, we're now introducing 4 simultaneous actors for strategic level decision making, and this is specifically for businesses and organizations. This is what we call the systemic 4. Next. And to blend this together with everything that I've talked before, so the intersection between industries and different schools of systems thinking, what we have at hand next is a pretty rich framework which we can use to analyze and evaluate different industries. And in this case, we have an automotive industry. So it gives us this holistic view of their pain points, but also emerging opportunities. Next. Just to give you a little bit of example of where we operate and what we've done using this tool. So we've turned a Marblestone into a multi-life modular digital economy where material doesn't follow the building and interior, but it can be reused over and over again on a platform. Next. Also, we've turned and designed a professional makeup artist cosmetics line into a clean beauty product as a system that fosters reusability. These are just quick examples to give a bit of more context into what this can be applied to. Next. But we know this is not enough. So last year, what we did see was a 5 to 10% drop in emissions as a result of COVID-19, right? So the cost of it was quite expensive for us. Major economies were literally shut down in order for us to experience this drop in emissions. And to show the perspective of how much change we really need to have in place, we need to have something similar every single year from this year onwards. Next. So this is where China comes in, and I think we can learn so much from China. It has a huge role in climate change, both as a polluter, but also as a leader in its efforts trying to address it. So China currently burns half of our world's coal and also emits 27% of all our global emissions. But also, it is the #1 leader in renewable energy sources, such as solar, wind, hydro, or the nuclear tech innovation. Next. So in terms of circular economy, the next 4 years, the government will prioritize it as part of its national roadmap, and it's directly linked to the 5-year plan. So don't have to read all this small text, but basically by 2025, just understand that the basic infrastructure for circular economy will be built in China. And this is very top-down, as we know how the country works, but the ripple effects of it can be huge. Next. So inspiration from China, and just to give you guys an example, there are a lot of green and cool projects popping up left and right, but I wanted to give spotlight specifically to an industry that perhaps isn't the sexiest. So this is about electric vehicles battery and how this company called GEM has built a in-house full life cycle circulation of electric battery. And this is one of the hardest things to do in circular design, to reuse waste and repurpose it or remanufacture it into something new that is legitimately useful and actually performs. So in this case, they scrap electric vehicles, the battery cases, break it down to raw materials, and circulate it all the way back to new battery packs, assemble it into new electric vehicle industry. Next. And as we know, this industry is booming in China. It's no coincidence that they are the #1 manufacturer and buyer of electric vehicles today. So from business opportunity perspective, this is a hub that is very much developing and growing very fast. Next, my last example of today is related to food. So a couple of years ago, we did this project in Shanghai called Zero Food Waste, and we challenged city urban dwellers to solve the food waste problem. And as we saw during COVID, it was a big problem as well. Farmers didn't have access directly to consumer markets, a lot of food waste because lack of middleman and lockdowns. And the project I wanted to shout out on this one is called Shared Harvest, which is a community-supported model where a consumer and a farmer both share the risk and the profit by participating in this platform. So you, as a user, subscribe to them, pay upfront, you finance these farmers basically, and in return you get reliability and transparency, which are big things in the China context, of course. Thank you. So this is my last slide, and finally, to finalize everything, I wanted to say that we're shifting more towards a holistic and systemic view of a lot of things in healing, in planetary healing, in personal healing as well. And this can be quite daunting and quite paralyzing sometimes, having this holistic view and systemic thinking all the time. So if there's one thing I've learned, and I wanted to share this, it's to find the right balance of the hierarchy of priorities. And this differs depend on each situation, of course. So it's a call to all of us to be more present and listen more and be more curious. Thank you.
Great. I think we're just going to have one more try with China, or shall we move to...
No.
Okay. So then make it...
2 questions.
Okay. Well, what we do is we do one question and we can respond to each other. We have, everybody had this, and I think we can have a dialogue within this group and then open up to the audience for one question. So we've all seen different experiences from working with Chinese communities. What is one key learnings, we'll start with you, Ole, which we could implement in joint design projects from working with China, from your experience in working with China? Key learning, if you could name one, because we're very short on time, so yeah. What we can bring here.
I think I can mention 2 points, but very short.
Great.
One is as I mentioned in my speech, the notion of healing as something that comes from within, or as something that is an argument from without. I think that as long as it remains an argument from without, as something that we are in need of embracing, because, and then there follows a description of all the predicaments of today, we are already too late. So we can wonder, we can investigate how we can make this more like an innate drive from the very beginning. So not an industry already very mature and developed, adopting a value of healing, but as something that comes from within. It's, for instance, very important for the educational system to make this, let's say, a natural element in education. And actually not just design education, but maybe even kindergarten education. So that has to do with the cultural acknowledgement of the need of this attitude that embraces the sense of healing. But the other one, which is, I think, also a message to many initiatives that I see represented in this Dutch Design Week, is to what extent do designers acknowledge the sense of urgency that corresponds to the actual situation? So I believe that, and I see many projects that are extremely refined, strong, well-intended, with beautiful minds behind, but they are still organizing themselves on the level of a single project within the discipline, a pilot as a message of positivity, etc. And I really wonder when we can switch the button and digest a sense of urgency that belongs to our real comprehension of how urgent we need to change. So we heard you speaking about system. The system need to be changed, not just projects. Right?
Yeah,
So
education is central. So is this?
But it's not only let's say a divergent like different panels of acting. It's also the more energy we put into changing our projects and to make them more well-intended and healing, the less we have time and actually resources to spend on changing the system. So we see a growing disparity between beautiful projects and a system that remains intrinsically on the wrong track. So there we need to bridge the gap. That need to be healed, maybe. So these two things, I think that having worked in China, this sense of urgency there is, I feel much stronger. Okay. The sense of urgency, and you showed a couple of examples. There is the battery technology is only a small symptom, but it represents a mindset that shows this sense of urgency and be implemented, deployed into a specific field. And I showed a few other projects, like for instance, what does it mean to put so much energy in using computers for almost every single...
The project of Alibaba, which we'll hear in the first section. So we have Alibaba with us, so we'll go into that. It's a great one. Yeah. Aric, is there something you would like to add to this? We're thinking of system and what we've seen in the last presentations of key learning points that you've...
I think maybe it's not a learning so much as an ethos, and I think it's somewhat related to what Ole was just saying, which is this the emphasis on kind of doing there and trying things out. You know, this sort of crossing the river by feeling the stones sort of idea that there is no right answer, not necessarily, and you don't know what the possible right answers might be. So you need to just try things. Now, in China's case, sometimes the tests are a little bit maybe too big, and you know, with too many far-reaching consequences. But I think you know, as a discipline, and I'm looking at design now from a cultural institutional perspective. You know, I think we've all, you know, spent a lot of well-intentioned time, you know, sort of speculating and posing questions and raising awareness about all the urgencies and crises and so on and so forth that we face. And I think we need to really acknowledge the fact that the time for just posing questions and raising awareness is way over. Like I personally can't bear to go to another exhibition where someone's telling me, showing me another way of seeing how screwed we are. Yeah. So what we can do, which I think for me was something that really got embedded in me in China, was, you know, let's try things out, and maybe if I can plug the New Institute a little bit, that's one of the things that we are trying to sort of reorient ourselves a little bit towards at the New Institute, is to becoming more of a testing ground. Always sort of a few steps ahead, but to kind of actually explore this realm of enacted speculation, not just to speculate, but actually to enact it. So, for example, you know, we've been working on a research project. One of our researchers developing this notion of the ZOOP, which is a framework for bringing non-human interests and voices into organizational decision making. And we just announced in Venice a few weeks ago that we will become the world's first ZOOP in a few months. And there are a number of other things as well. But I think as designers, as cultural players, I think we need to be turning more words into actions in whatever way we can, because we can.
Great. Just short, Ying, if you want to respond to that, if you have something before we go to or you're okay?
Yeah. Key learnings from China, right? And on all of this. So maybe to add on, my background comes from business, right? So I'm a tourist in the design space.
Yeah.
Yes. And I obviously, China is if we combine business and China together in one sentence, I think there's just so much speed and agility happening that to me alone is quite inspiring in all of this. So if we talk about this in the context of sustainability and climate change, right, and then we're talking about it's no longer about why, but how, and we need to take action, which is very much what we're trying to do. China is one of those markets where, to be honest, I am worried, but I'm not that worried about it in terms of climate change. I think it's moving very fast. It's going to be top down, and it's going to be bottom up at the same time. As long as the government gives the direction, all operators are, I said in my presentation, be like water. I literally think stakeholders are going to be in it and get very creative with what can be done. Some of you might know the waste sorting that happened in certain cities, including Shanghai in 2019. And I was traveling in Europe for a couple of weeks, came back, and literally from no waste sorting, overnight it became a country of full waste sorting. Suddenly everyone was doing it, and we had an officer standing in front of our residential complex garbage waste space, officing the hours, what you were bringing in. People were playing video games that taught you how to sort waste, like where do you throw a banana leaf and so forth. So it's a fast-moving economy, and I think in terms of systems thinking, it's just about incentivizing its people and companies to move towards the right direction. As long as we have incentive, I think I'm an optimist in that.
Okay, we now have time for one question, I think, because we're over time, unfortunately, so we're going to have to cut down our break. But is there a question from the audience? So if you would like to raise your hand, and you can, if there is none, we have some questions from Zoom, I believe. So.
We have to go to the break.
Oh, we have to go to the break. Oh, wow. So we have a really short break, I believe. And just before we go into the break, we have also a fun project that we wanted to share with you that's trending in China. It's about restoring the magic between plants and people. The designers call themselves, they like to call themselves farmers. And what they're doing is they're growing Chinese design on Chinese land. So we have just a short intro film of super plants. And then how long do we have for the break? Just a few minutes? We have 2 minutes. So you're free to go now if you need to go. And we'll see you back in 2-3 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. That was great.